Indeed, may God, maker of peace in the heavens, Oseh Shalom b'Ramav, grant peace on earth. I have this funny habit of looking for mountains all the time. I know, I live in Illinois. I miss them living here, though I've lived here more than I've lived anywhere else in my life. Not that I grew up around big mountains, but I called them hills, but they're actually small mountains in northern New Jersey. And some had really great views, particularly of Manhattan, which we would exclaim every time we saw them, as if we had never seen them before. Whoa, you can see the city. There aren't so many mountains here, but I keep looking. A few weeks ago, though, I headed to California for a retreat, to a place I had been many years before and have been since, the Brandeis Bardeen Institute in the Simi Valley, about an hour, 45 minutes from LA. And I knew there would be mountains. I knew what the place looked like. And then I broke my glasses on the way there. Yeah. I wear progressives. Not so easy to walk into the drugstore, but I ran into CVS. I got a pair of glasses and thought, okay, maybe it's going to help me on this 4.5-day retreat with lots of small Hebrew letters. Interestingly, wearing those not-so-perfect glasses made all the difference. Yes, I could see the California mountains without my bifocals. They're really big enough. They're those real live bumps of stone and mud and all that. That wasn't surprising. But what's surprising was a different kind of mountain. Mountains of words. Mountains of words written in kind of fuzzy Hebrew and English that I was looking at through those interim lenses that I could only wear for so long. And through those imperfect glasses that week, I studied the prose of Chaim Nachman Bialik, the great Israeli poet and writer who was born in Ukraine in the late 19th century and wrote in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He is still to this day held in the highest of esteem as the founding father of modern Hebrew poetry. Bialik wrote in multiple languages, and he wrote poetry and he wrote prose. So that week, I studied Bialik's words, partnered with words from the Zohar, our 13th century, the foundational Kabbalistic or mystical work. And I was blessed to be with 50 rabbis, cantors, and educators on a retreat for the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And we were taught by a brilliant Israeli scholar who was out of Israel for the first time since October. So for Professor Melina Hellner-Eshed, it was powerful on all fronts. We were all alumni of a clergy retreat called the Clergy Leadership Program. I had been blessed to participate in 2.5 years of a clergy mindfulness program, a program that usually lasts for a year and a half, but my cohort started in January of 2020. Well, we knew what happened next. So since we didn't have in-person retreats, we got an extra year, which was pretty amazing to get through the pandemic with a cohort of people with whom we were studying, meditating, even trying to do yoga, I'm not so good at that, in our own homes, but learning, taking on mindfulness practice. So during that first week of February of this year, I was back at the Brandeis Bardeen Institute, drenched by water. That was the week that California rains just kept going, and immersed in mindfulness practice. And the text we studied that week was about words. Bialik compares, in this incredible essay that we study, he compares words to mountains. And he writes about words which are like high mountains of God, words which are elevated, words which have meaning, which are lofty. And he writes about words which are like a great abyss, or husks, empty, or debased. And despite straining with my eyes to focus on the small print of the Hebrew and English, I saw powerful images in his words. Bialik's mountains are about mystics and poets, and he writes about the choice to use words or to not, to speak or to be silent. He writes about letters really with some graphic, beautiful words of talking about letters almost auditioning, letters that have a smell, that have a taste, words that explode with poetry and others that are empty husks. devoid of meaning or content. So Bialik writes about mountains that are holy and ordinary, some that are brilliantly shimmering, and some that are balancing on ice flows. You know those big pieces of ice you might see at a glacier? Uncertain. So there we were studying in the mountains, we were in a valley, and studying words about words, words that were compared to mountains and depths. Mountains, it's kind of a Jewish thing, right? Think about all the mountains in our tradition. I'll give you a few. Where does anyone know, where does Noah's Ark land? It's not really a quiz. Mount Ararat, right? Okay, where does Moses die? Anyone? Mount Nebo. Late in Deuteronomy, we read about blessings and curses being called from two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. That's a little less known. How about Elijah? Anyone? He takes on the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, where some of you probably have been, your Haifa. And what about Abraham? Where does he go with Isaac? Mount Moriah. As well, we have with Psalm 121. Some of us may be familiar with singing it. Esa enai el heharim, me'ayin yavo izrim. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where will my help come? And then, of course, there's the most famous, perhaps, of Jewish mountains, Sinai, where we got the 10 Commandments and the rest of the Torah. So this week, I won't ask, you're tomorrow morning. Yes, they're at Sinai. What happens? Moses is up on the mountain. You don't have to answer if you don't want. And what do the Israelites do? They make a golden calf because they're super restless, because he's up there for 40, right? He's up there for 40 days. They get frustrated. They get worried. So Moses, with the people, with Aaron's help, build a golden calf. And the rest, as we say, isn't pretty, right, Elliot? No. Moses gets angry. He smashes the tablets. They have to eat them, drunk with water, though some of them are saved. But let's go back for a moment. Forget that not so great scene. Let's go back to the choice of mountains. We don't really get that in Torah. Why Sinai? The rabbis over the centuries actually write a lot about this. They say that the mountains, there's a beautiful midrash, and this is rabbinic creativity over the centuries, but they actually say that the mountains fought for the honor to be the spot for revelation. So those of you who have children, imagine your kids fighting for, say, the prime seat in the car, or shotgun when they're old enough to sit in the front, only more. So the rabbinic imagination here is great, and there's a dialogue in the Midrash where they say things like, well, I sunk down and let the Israelites cross the sea. And then I said, but I was here where Noah's Ark landed, or things like that. And they're arguing, saying, well, like, I'm the best one. I should get revelation, right? And ultimately, God calls out to the mountains, or divine voice does, and says, none of you get it. Some of us as parents have had those moments, right? No one's going to sit there because you're all fighting. Ultimately, God says, you're not going to get it because you're fighting and you're arrogant. Instead, I'm going with Sinai. Sinai, by the way, was not the biggest mountain. In fact, the rabbis say it was the smallest and the most insignificant of the mountains. And Sinai, in this beautiful midrash, was not even in the conversation. Sinai was not arguing. The rabbis add that Sinai also had never experienced idolatry, and that maybe it was part of Mount Moriah where Abraham demonstrated his ultimate faith. But the big thing here is that Sinai represented humility, modesty. So once again, mountains and words are connected. The mountain chosen for our ancestors to receive arguably the most important words we have of Torah is the mountain that didn't yell out, that didn't exclaim negative speech, didn't fight, and wasn't the place of God's name taken in vain or idolatry. So think about that. Sinai was not yelling to be the loudest. Sinai represented humility, perhaps peacefulness even, not hateful speech. There's our example. I think it's that simple for us. We don't have to be the biggest mountain or the loudest voice, even if our world tells us that we need to be the loudest to be heard. We can be like Sinai. Our words can be guided by an example of restraint and deliberate choice with a positive goal. It's not easy. It's not easy when we are told, say it louder or say it with more anger or more power, but it's possible. Even here in the Plain States, we can look for mountains, each of us, each time we speak, each time we write, each time we post on the internet, each time we text. Remember, Bialik compares words to mountains and writes about words which are like high mountains of God and words which are like a great abyss. I invite you this Shabbat to think about which words are yours. Shabbat Shalom.